What would you do if the person you were falling for had been lying about everything? Louis Romano was worth $800 million, owned a tech empire, and lived in a penthouse that cost more than most people's houses. But when he showed up to his blind date, he drove a beat-up Honda, wore clothes from Target, and claimed he worked as a part-time mechanic. His plan was simple: find someone who loved him for who he really was, not his bank account. But when his 6-year-old daughter Mia looked across the restaurant table at successful marketing executive Audrey Stone and whispered, "Daddy, why are you lying to the nice lady?" Everything Louis thought he knew about love, honesty, and second chances was about to change forever. Because sometimes the truth you're hiding isn't the only secret at the table, and sometimes a little girl's innocent question can expose lies that go deeper than anyone imagined. This is the story of how one man's deception led to the most shocking revelation of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the windows of Bella Vista, a cozy Italian restaurant in downtown Portland, as Louis Romano adjusted his thrift store sweater and checked his reflection in his phone screen. The fabric felt rough against skin accustomed to Egyptian cotton and cashmere. His calloused hands, carefully manufactured through weeks of working out without gloves, gripped the steering wheel of a 2015 Honda Civic that he'd purchased specifically for this charade. At 34, Louis commanded boardrooms where billion-dollar deals were negotiated with the casualness of ordering coffee. Romano's cybersecurity had grown from a startup in his garage to the most trusted name in digital protection, with Fortune 500 companies paying millions for his proprietary algorithms. His penthouse overlooked the Columbia River, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows and art collections worth more than most people's annual salaries. But tonight, he was playing Louis Romano, part-time mechanic, struggling single father, and recent transplant to Portland, trying to make ends meet. The preparation had been meticulous. He'd spent 3 weeks learning enough about car repair to hold a conversation, watching YouTube videos, and memorizing terminology he'd never needed in his climate-controlled world of servers and code. He'd practiced walking differently, slouching slightly, letting his shoulders carry the weight of imaginary financial stress. His usual confident stride, the walk of a man who'd never worried about money, had been replaced with something more cautious, more worn down. The dating profile had been crafted with surgical precision by his assistant, though she'd refused to participate once she understood the full scope of the deception. "This is going to backfire spectacularly," Sarah had warned, but Louis had been adamant. 3 previous relationships had ended the same way. Women who'd been drawn to his wealth, who'd seen him as a prize to be won rather than a person to be loved. The last one, Victoria, had been particularly brutal. She'd only discovered his true worth 6 months into their relationship, and her entire personality had shifted overnight. Suddenly, every conversation revolved around expensive restaurants she wanted to try, exotic vacation destinations that would look good on her Instagram, jewelry that would signal her new status to friends. "I love you for you," she'd insisted, when he'd finally confronted her about the change. But you had apparently meant your bank account, because she'd vanished the moment he'd suggested they sign a prenuptial agreement. So this time, Louis had decided to try a different approach. If someone could fall for a broke mechanic, maybe, just maybe, they could love a billionaire CEO for the right reasons. The Honda's engine coughed as he turned it off, a sound that still made him wince after weeks of driving it. His Lamborghini Huracan sat safely in his private garage, along with the Tesla Model S and the vintage Porsche he'd restored as a hobby. But tonight, the Honda was his chariot, complete with a cracked windshield and a radio that only picked up AM stations. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Mia, his 6-year-old daughter, who was quietly drawing in her sketchbook. She wore a simple dress from Target, another part of the costume. Though he'd had to stop himself from buying her the beautiful velvet dress she'd admired at Nordstrom the week before. Mia had adapted to their broke dad routine with the resilience that had carried her through her mother's death 2 years ago, though she occasionally slipped up with comments about their real house or the other cars. "Remember, sweetheart," he said softly, turning to face her. "Tonight I'm just dad who fixes cars, okay? Not the other stuff we talked about." Mia looked up from her drawing, her dark eyes so much like her mother's, studying his face with an intensity that sometimes unnerved him. At 6, she possessed an emotional intelligence that often made him feel like the one being parented. "Why do we have to pretend, Daddy? Why can't you just tell her the truth?" "Because sometimes people change when they learn about money," he explained for the dozenth time. "I want her to like us for us, not for what we have." "But lying is wrong," Mia said simply, returning to her sketch. "Mama always said lying makes everything harder." The mention of Elena sent the familiar pang through his chest. His wife had been a kindergarten teacher who'd cared more about her students' emotional growth than her salary. She'd married him when Romano Cybersecurity was still operating out of their one-bedroom apartment, when instant ramen was a dietary staple and their biggest luxury was splitting a 6-pack of beer on Friday nights. Elena had loved him when he was nobody, and that pure, uncomplicated affection had been the foundation of everything good in his life. After she died, a cogus, sudden aneurysm that took her away between breakfast and bedtime, leaving Louis a single father without warning, he'd thrown himself into work with the desperation of a drowning man. The company had exploded during his grief, as if success was the universe's cruel compensation for his loss. But wealth without Elena felt hollow, meaningless except for how it could provide security for Mia. Dadding had seemed impossible. How do you explain to someone that you're worth nearly $1 billion, but still cry into your pillow some nights? How do you navigate the complex world of adult relationships when your priority is a little girl who still asks when mama is coming home? The few women he'd met organically had been kind, but ultimately overwhelmed by the reality of single parenthood. The ones who actively pursued him had been attracted to his success, not his character. "She's here," Mia announced, looking up from her drawing toward the restaurant entrance. Louis followed her gaze and felt his breath catch. Audrey Stone walked through the door with the confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. She was shorter than he'd expected from her photos, maybe 5'6", with auburn hair that caught the warm restaurant lighting. Her smile was genuine as she scanned the room, not the practiced expression of someone performing. She wore a simple black dress and boots that were elegant without being flashy, carrying herself with an ease that spoke of competence rather than pretension. When their eyes met across the restaurant, she raised her hand in a small wave, and Louis felt something shift in his chest. This was why he was here, taking this enormous risk. The possibility of connection with someone who might see past the surface to who he really was. "She's pretty," Mia observed, closing her sketchbook. "She has kind eyes." "Remember our rules," Louis whispered, standing to wave Audrey over to their corner booth. "I know, Daddy, but I still think lying is wrong." Audrey approached their table with a warm smile that seemed to encompass both of them equally. She didn't do what most of his dates did, focus entirely on him while treating Mia like an obstacle to navigate. Instead, she crouched down to Mia's eye level first. "You must be Mia," she said warmly. "Your dad has told me so much about you. I love your dress. That shade of blue is perfect with your eyes." Mia beamed under the attention, but Louis noticed her glancing between him and Audrey with that calculating look that meant trouble was brewing. "I'm sorry we're running a bit late," Louis said, helping Audrey with her coat. The gesture felt natural, automatic, though he noticed her surprised appreciation. "Traffic was heavier than I expected, and then Mia needed to grab her art supplies." "No worries at all," Audrey replied, settling into the booth across from them. "I was early anyway. I had a client meeting that wrapped up sooner than expected." The Menu prices made Louis cringe theatrically, though they were actually quite reasonable compared to the places he usually dined. He watched Audrey scan the options with genuine consideration, not the dismissive glance of someone accustomed to. Expense accounts. "The pasta looks amazing," she said. "Though honestly, everything sounds good. I haven't been here before, have you?" "Once or twice," Louis lied smoothly. In truth, he'd never eaten at Bella Vista, though he'd researched it thoroughly. The kind of place a struggling mechanic might take someone special, but not so expensive as to seem unrealistic. "Mia loves their spaghetti and meatballs, don't you, sweetheart?" But Mia wasn't listening to the conversation about food. She was staring at Audrey with the same intense focus she'd had in the car, her small hands clasped tightly around her sketchbook. "You look familiar," she said suddenly, her voice carrying that matter-of-fact certainty that made everything else in Louis's world feel unstable. "Like someone I've seen before, but not in real life." Audrey tilted her head, genuinely curious. "Oh, where do you think you might have seen me?" "In my dreams," Mia replied simply, opening her sketchbook to a page that made Louis's blood run cold. The drawing showed a woman with auburn hair standing in what looked like a corporate office, tears streaming down her face as she held a small pink blanket. In the background, barely sketched but recognizable, was the distinctive Portland skyline visible from only the highest floors of the downtown business district. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mia draws a lot of imaginary people," Louis said quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "She has quite an active imagination." But Audrey was studying the sketch with an expression Louis couldn't read. Her face had gone pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "That's a very detailed drawing," she said softly. "The background. That's the view from the Cascade Tower, isn't it?" "The executive floors?" Mia nodded enthusiastically. "You work up really high where you can see the whole city. You wear pretty suits and have a big desk, but you're always sad about something. Small and pink that got lost." The silence that followed was deafening. Louis felt the elaborate fiction he'd constructed beginning to crumble around him, but something else was happening too. Audrey's reaction wasn't confusion or polite interest. It was recognition and fear. "I think," Audrey said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." The children's menu became a prop as Louis tried to process what had just happened. Mia's drawing lay open between them, the auburn-haired woman's tears seeming to shimmer under the restaurant's warm lighting. Audrey stared at the sketch as if it held the secrets of the universe, her professional composure completely shattered. "Mia has always been artistic," Louis said carefully, reaching for the sketchbook. "She draws all sorts of people and places. Her imagination is, no." Audrey's voice cut through his explanation with quiet authority. "That's not imagination." She looked up at him, and Louis saw something in her eyes that made his elaborate deception feel suddenly small and selfish. "That's the view from my office. 32nd floor of Cascade Tower. And I." She stopped, glancing at Mia, then back at Louis. "I think we have a lot more to discuss than either of us expected." Mia, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults, flipped through more pages of her sketchbook. Each drawing showed the same woman in different scenarios, sitting alone in what looked like a boardroom, standing at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, crying over something small held in her hands. "I dream about her a lot," Mia explained to Audrey with the matter-of-fact tone that only small people could manage when discussing the impossible. "Usually you're very sad about something you lost. Something important that was supposed to be yours forever." Audrey's composure cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at drawings that depicted moments no one else should have been able to witness. Private moments of grief in her corner office, late nights when she thought she was completely alone with her pain. How is this possible? She whispered. Louis felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. His carefully planned evening of deception had taken a turn into something that felt far more significant than anything he'd prepared for. "Audrey, I think there might be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Mia interrupted, fixing him with those dark eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. "And Daddy, you need to stop lying now. The nice lady deserves the truth." "Mia, you don't fix cars," she continued relentlessly, her 6-year-old voice carrying the weight of moral authority. "You have computers everywhere, and people call you Mr. Romano and ask you to make important decisions. We don't live in the little apartment you told her about. We live in the tall building with the pretty elevators and the man who opens doors." Louis felt his face burn with embarrassment as his deception unraveled in real time. But worse than the humiliation was the look on Audrey's face, not anger, but something closer to understanding mixed with profound sadness. "You're Romano Cybersecurity," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Louis Romano, the billionaire CEO. The jig was up. Louis nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I can explain, can you?" Audrey's voice was soft but carried an edge he hadn't heard before. "Can you explain why you felt the need to lie about everything? Your job, your life, your your circumstances?" "Because every woman I've dated since Alina died has only cared about the money," Louis said desperately. "I wanted to meet someone who could love me for who I really am, not what I have. Who you really are." Audrey repeated, her professional mask sliding back into place. "You mean someone who lies to potential partners from the first moment you meet them? Someone who teaches his daughter that deception is acceptable when it serves your purposes?" Mia looked between them with growing concern. "Are you mad at Daddy?" Audrey paused, studying Mia's worried face. "I'm disappointed, sweetheart. Not at you, you've been honest about everything. But grown-ups shouldn't lie to each other, especially when they're trying to build trust." "That's what I told him," Mia said solemnly. "Mama always said the truth might hurt for a minute, but lies hurt forever." The wisdom of it hit Louis like a physical blow. Alina had said those exact words to him once, during an argument early in their marriage about a small deception he'd told his parents about their finances. He'd forgotten until this moment, but Mia had clearly internalized the lesson. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman," Audrey said gently to Mia, though her eyes remained fixed on Louis with something that might have been pity. "She was. She died when I was 4, but I remember lots of things she taught me." Mia flipped to another page in her sketchbook, like this. The new drawing showed a different scene entirely. A woman with auburn hair sitting across from a man, and a little girl in what was unmistakably Bella Vista restaurant. But in Mia's sketch, the woman was smiling, not crying. Her hands were extended across the table, not clutched protectively to her chest. "This is how it's supposed to be," Mia explained. "When everyone tells the truth and stops being scared." Audrey stared at the drawing, and Louis saw something shift in her expression. The professional distance melted away, replaced by something more vulnerable. "Mia," she said carefully, "how long have you been drawing me?" "Since we moved to Portland 6 months ago. The dream started the first night in our new house, the tall one with all the windows. You were the first new person I saw." Louis felt the world tilt on its axis. They'd moved to Portland specifically for him to open the West Coast branch of Romano Cybersecurity. The penthouse had been purchased sight unseen, chosen for its security features and proximity to the business district. But if Mia had been dreaming about Audrey since their first night, their double quotes, "What company do you work for?" he asked Audrey, though something in his gut already knew the answer would complicate everything. "Stone Marketing Solutions," she replied, watching his face carefully. "We're the agency your company hired to handle the launch campaign for Romano Cybersecurity's Portland expansion." The silence that followed was profound. Louis felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with terrifying precision. The marketing agency he'd selected from a list provided by his team. The woman who'd been recommended as the perfect person to understand his company's mission. The professional relationship that had brought her into his orbit months before he'd ever created his fake dating profile. "You've been working on my account," he said slowly, "for 4 months. I've been to your office. I've sat in meetings with your team." She stopped, realization dawning. "I've been developing marketing strategies based on what I thought I knew about your values. Integrity, honesty, protection of what matters most." The irony was devastating. Louis had hired the woman he was now lying to help him present his company as trustworthy and reliable. She'd been crafting campaigns around his supposed moral character while he'd been constructing an elaborate fiction to deceive her. "Oh God," he breathed. "Audrey, I had no idea you were the woman who's been working 60-hour weeks to make your Portland launch successful." Her voice carried a bitter edge now. "The person who turned down 3 other major clients because I believed in your company's mission? The professional who's been praising your integrity to everyone in the industry?" Mia looked between them with growing distress. "Why is everyone upset? The drawing shows it working out." "Sometimes, sweetheart," Audrey said gently, though her eyes remained hard when they shifted to Louis. "The drawings show what could happen if people make better choices." She began gathering her purse, the movement decisive. "I think this evening has been educational for all of us." "Wait," Louis said desperately. "Please, let me explain properly. You've explained enough." Audrey stood, but then paused, looking down at Mia with genuine affection. "Thank you for showing me your beautiful drawings, Mia. You're a very talented artist, and a very wise little girl." "Don't go," Mia pleaded, reaching for Audrey's hand. "The pictures show you staying. They show us all being happy." Audrey knelt down to Mia's level, and Louis saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Sometimes the pictures show what we hope for, not what actually happens. But you keep drawing, okay? Keep believing in happy endings." She kissed Mia's forehead gently, then straightened to face Louis. "I'll need to recuse myself from your account, obviously. There's a clear conflict of interest now. Audrey, please. Have a good evening, Mr. Romano." She walked away without looking back, leaving Louis sitting in the ruins of his elaborate deception with a 6-year-old who was staring at him with the kind of disappointment that cut deeper than any business loss ever could. "You really messed up, Daddy," Mia said sadly, closing her sketchbook. She was supposed to stay for the good part. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum as Louis carried a sleeping Mia from the Honda to their private elevator. The contrast between the beat-up car and the gleaming marble lobby of Meridian Tower was jarring, a visual reminder of the double life he'd been living. The elevator climbed silently to the 42nd floor, Portland's skyline spreading out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows that had cost more than most people's houses. Mia stirred as he tucked her into her princess bed, a custom piece from Italy that had taken 6 months to create and ship. Her room was a wonderland of carefully curated toys and furniture, each piece selected to bring joy while maintaining the aesthetic integrity of their home. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he'd been pretending to struggle financially, his daughter slept surrounded by luxury that could fund a small school district. "Is she going to give us another chance?" Mia asked sleepily, her dark eyes reflecting the city lights outside her window. "I don't know, baby," Louis admitted, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I think I hurt her feelings pretty badly. You could say sorry. Some mistakes are too big for just sorry." Mia considered this with the seriousness that had characterized her since Elena's death. Mama used to say that the size of the sorry had to match the size of the mistake. Maybe you need a really, really big sorry. After she'd drifted off, Louis found himself standing in his home office, surrounded by the teal trappings of success that suddenly felt like prison bars. 3 monitors displayed the global operations of Romano cybersecurity offices in 12 countries, over 2,000 employees, contracts with governments and corporations that trusted him to protect their most sensitive data. The company he'd built from nothing now generated revenue that exceeded some nations' GDP, but none of it meant anything without someone to share it with. The journey to this isolation had begun long before Alina's death. Louis had started Romano Cybersecurity at 22, fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree and an audacity that his professors had called either brilliant or dangerous. His parents, immigrants from Sicily who'd worked double shifts to pay for his education, had been skeptical when he'd turned down lucrative job offers to pursue his own vision. Security, his father had said, hands stained with grease from his job at the Boeing factory. People will always need protection. Build something that makes people safe, and they'll pay you well for it. The early days had been brutal. 18-hour coding sessions in a studio apartment that smelled like instant noodles and desperation. Pitching to venture capitalists who saw a young Italian-American kid from a working-class family and dismissed him before he'd finished explaining his revolutionary approach to cybersecurity. Eating rice and beans for months to afford the server space needed to demonstrate his prototypes. Elena had entered his life during those lean years, a bright spot in the grinding routine of building something from nothing. She'd been substitute, teaching at the elementary school near his apartment, picking up shifts wherever she could find them. They'd met at a coffee shop where he'd been squatting with his laptop all day, nursing a single espresso because it was all he could afford. "You know they're not going to kick you out if you buy another drink," she'd said, sliding into the chair across from him with a smile that made his forget the lines of code he'd been debugging. "Maybe not," he'd replied, "but that would require having money for another drink." Instead of being put off by his honesty about his financial situation, Elena had laughed. "Well, lucky for you, I just got paid for a week of teaching third graders about fractions. Coffee's on me if you'll tell me what's so fascinating on that screen." That conversation had lasted 4 hours. Elena had been genuinely interested in his work, asking intelligent questions about cybersecurity that had nothing to do with potential profit margins. She'd understood, intuitively, that he wasn't building a company just to get rich. He was trying to create something meaningful, something that would protect people from the digital vulnerabilities that kept him awake at night. Their courtship had been defined by creativity born from financial necessity. Picnics in public parks with sandwiches they'd made at home. Movie nights featuring films from the library's DVD collection. Dates that involved long walks and longer conversations, building intimacy through shared dreams rather than shared expenses. Elena had been there through the first major contract that put Romano cybersecurity on the map, celebrating with a bottle of champagne they'd split between 3 plastic cups because they didn't own proper glasses. She'd been there through the second round of funding that moved them from the studio apartment to a modest 2-bedroom rental. She'd been there when the company went public and their net worth jumped from comfortable to incomprehensible overnight. "Promise me we won't change," she'd whispered on the night they'd first looked at penthouses and luxury cars. "Promise me we'll remember what actually matters." He'd promised, and for a while, they'd managed to stay grounded. Elena had continued teaching because she loved it, not because they needed her income. They'd moved to a beautiful but reasonable house in the suburbs close to her school. Louis had resisted the urge to buy every gadget and luxury that suddenly became available, choosing instead to invest in experiences, travel, education, time together. But wealth has its own gravity. Slowly, inevitably, their world had expanded to match their means. The house became larger, the cars more expensive, the vacations more exotic. Not from greed, but from the simple reality that when money was no object, objects multiplied. Staff appeared to manage the details of their increasingly complex life. Personal assistants, housekeepers, financial advisors, security consultants. Elena had struggled with the changes more than Louis had realized at the time. She'd grown up in a middle-class family where luxury was a weekend dinner out, not a private jet to wine country. The attention that came with Louis's growing public profile had made her uncomfortable. Business magazines wanting to feature their power couple lifestyle. Society photographers at charity events. The subtle but persistent pressure to become someone she'd never wanted to be. "I feel like I'm disappearing," she'd confessed one night, 2 years before her death. They just returned from a business function where she'd been introduced as Louis Romano's wife so many times that her own identity as an educator seemed to evaporate. "I used to be Elena Martinez's teacher. Now I'm just an accessory to your success." He'd tried to address her concerns, but the momentum of success was difficult to slow. Romano's cybersecurity demanded more travel, more networking, more public appearances. Elena had accompanied him when she could, but increasingly chose to stay home with Mia, creating the stable family environment that Louis's demanding schedule couldn't provide. Looking back, Louis realized he'd been so focused on building their future security that he'd missed Elena's present unhappiness. He'd assumed that financial freedom meant emotional freedom, not understanding that money could be its own kind of prison when it separated you from the life you'd actually wanted to live. When Mia was born, Elena had found renewed purpose. Motherhood suited her completely, and she'd thrown herself into parenting with the same dedication she'd once brought to teaching. The nursery had been her masterpiece, not because of the expensive furniture Louis had wanted to buy, but because every detail reflected her love and careful attention. "She's going to be grounded in what matters," Elena had declared, rocking tiny Mia while Louis worked late on a contract that would secure their financial future for generations. Money can't buy character, and character is what makes a life worth living. But character was exactly what Louis had compromised tonight. Sitting in his office surrounded by the evidence of his success, he finally understood what Elena had tried to tell him years ago. Wealth without integrity was just elaborate emptiness. Success without honesty was just a sophisticated lie. Dating profile that had led to tonight's disaster had been created during a particularly lonely period, 6 months after moving to Portland. The transition had been harder than expected. New city, new office, new social dynamics. Mia had adjusted well to her new school, but Louis had found himself isolated among people who knew him only as the billionaire CEO, not as a father still figuring out how to braid hair or negotiate bedtime stories. His few attempts at dating through normal channels had been disasters. Women who'd Googled him before the first date, arriving with assumptions about his lifestyle and expectations about their potential relationship. Conversations that felt more like job interviews or business negotiations than genuine attempts at connection. The fake profile had been an experiment born from desperation. If he could meet someone as Louis, single dad who fixes cars on weekends, maybe he could find the kind of connection he'd had with Elena based on character, compatibility, and genuine affection rather than financial attraction. But tonight had proven that the foundation of any real relationship had to be truth. And the truth was that Louis Romano, billionaire CEO, was just as lonely and lost as Louis the fake mechanic. The money hadn't protected him from grief, hadn't made parenting easier, hadn't filled the Elena-shaped hole in his life that grew larger rather than smaller with each passing year. Worse, his deception had hurt someone who, based on Mia's drawings, might have been exactly what he'd been looking for all along. Audrey Stone's professional competence was evident in the marketing campaigns she'd developed for his company. Her kindness was obvious in how she'd treated Mia. Her integrity was demonstrated by her immediate recognition that their professional relationship represented a conflict of interest. He'd met a woman of character and had responded by lying to her. The irony was devastating. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "How did the date go? Do I need to prepare for damage control?" Louis stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Prepare for me to do something that might look insane but is actually the first sane thing I've done in months." Audrey Stone's corner office on the 32nd floor of Cascade Tower offered a panoramic view of Portland's skyline, but she wasn't admiring the scenery as she paced between her desk and the floor-to-ceiling windows at 2 in the morning. The building was empty except for security guards and the occasional cleaning crew, giving her the privacy she needed to process what had happened at Bella Vista. On her desk, spread across the polished surface like evidence of an unsolved crime, lay every piece of marketing material she developed for Romano Cybersecurity over the past 4 months. Campaign concepts celebrating integrity and trust. Brand messaging about protecting what matters most. Taglines emphasizing honest communication and reliable protection. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. She'd spent countless hours crafting Louis Romano's public image as a trustworthy leader, someone whose word was his bond, someone who understood that true security came from genuine relationships built on mutual respect. She'd written speeches for him about the importance of honesty in business relationships, had designed advertisements showcasing him as a family man whose values guided his corporate decisions, and all the while, he'd been planning to lie to her about everything. But that wasn't what had her pacing at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep despite the emotional exhaustion that should have knocked her unconscious the moment she'd arrived home. What kept her awake was the impossible accuracy of 6-year-old Mia's drawings, sketches that depicted moments of private grief that no one else should have been able to witness. Audrey walked to the window where Mia had drawn her standing, tears streaming down her face as she held something small and pink. The view was exactly right, the angle of the river, the positioning of the bridges, the specific buildings visible from this height. But more unsettling was the emotional accuracy. Mia had captured not just the physical scene, but the devastating loneliness that had characterized Audrey's life for the past 3 years. 3 years since the miscarriage that had ended not just her pregnancy, but her marriage to David Graham. They'd tried for 2 years to get pregnant, timing everything with scientific precision, consulting specialists, adjusting diets and lifestyles and hope levels with each passing month. When the test finally showed 2 pink lines, Audrey had felt her entire world realign around the possibility of motherhood. She'd been 12 weeks along when the bleeding started. 12 weeks of planning, dreaming, secretly shopping for tiny clothes that she'd hidden in her closet like treasures. 12 weeks of imagining a future that included family dinners and bedtime stories, and all the ordinary magic that came with raising a person from scratch. The loss had hit David differently than it had hit her. For him, it had been a setback, devastating, but something to recover from and try again. For Audrey, it had felt like losing a piece of her soul that could never be replaced. The grief had been all-consuming, a black hole that pulled in every other emotion until she'd existed in a state of numbness that protected her from feeling anything at all. "We can try again," David had said, holding her while she sobbed in their bedroom 3 months after the miscarriage. "The doctors said there's no reason we can't have a healthy pregnancy." But Audrey hadn't been ready to try again. The possibility of losing another pregnancy, of having hope ripped away again, had felt insurmountable. She'd needed time to grieve, to heal, to rediscover who she was outside of the identity of mother-to-be that had defined her for those precious 12 weeks. David had tried to be patient, but his timeline for healing hadn't matched hers. As months passed without her feeling ready to try again, tension had grown between them. Small disagreements became major fights. Supportive gestures began to feel like pressure. The easy intimacy they'd shared began to feel forced, mechanical, tainted by the unspoken expectation that every intimate moment might result in the pregnancy that would fix everything. "I can't live with a ghost," David had finally said, 18 months after the miscarriage. "I know you're still grieving, but I feel like you've decided to stay in that grief forever." I need a partner who wants to build a future, not someone who's stuck mourning the past. The divorce had been amicable but devastating. David wasn't wrong, she had been stuck. But she hadn't known how to unstick herself from the loss that felt more real than any potential future. They'd sold the suburban house they'd bought with children in mind, dividing assets with the mechanical precision of people who'd run out of emotional energy for fighting. Audrey had thrown herself into work with the single-minded focus of someone who needed to prove her worth in the only arena where she felt competent. Stone Marketing Solutions had been her way of building something from scratch, of creating success that belonged entirely to her. If she couldn't nurture a family, she could nurture businesses, helping them grow and thrive through strategic communication and authentic brand development. The irony was that her personal experience with loss had made her exceptionally good at her job. She understood the vulnerability that businesses felt when launching new ventures, the fear of failure that kept entrepreneurs awake at night. She could identify the authentic core of a company's mission because she'd learned to recognize authenticity in her own life, what was real and what was performance, what was genuine growth and what was just going through the motions. Romano Cybersecurity had been different from her usual clients. Most companies hired her to help them appear more trustworthy or more innovative than they actually were. But Louis Romano's business had felt genuinely solid from the beginning. The security solutions were revolutionary, the company culture seemed healthy, and the public information about the CEO suggested someone who'd built success without compromising his values. She'd been drawn to the account not just professionally, but personally. The company's mission, protecting what matters most, had resonated with her own desire to help businesses safeguard their most valuable assets. She'd seen in Romano Cybersecurity the kind of authentic success story that made her profession feel meaningful rather than manipulative. Working on his Portland launch had consumed her for months. She'd studied his previous interviews, analyzed his company's growth patterns, developed messaging strategies that would resonate with West Coast clients who valued both innovation and integrity. She'd written case studies showcasing how his technology had protected small businesses from cyber attacks that could have destroyed generational family enterprises. She'd crafted his professional image as someone who understood that true security came from genuine relationships built on trust and transparency. And apparently, she'd been marketing a lie. The small pink blanket that Mia had drawn her holding was real. Audrey kept it in her desk drawer, the only baby item she'd been unable to donate or throw away after the miscarriage. Some evenings when the office was empty and the city lights created privacy, she'd take it out and hold it while looking out at the skyline, imagining the life that might have been. How had a 6-year-old girl drawn that moment with such devastating accuracy? The positioning at the window, the specific view, the emotional devastation that she thought she'd hidden from the world, all of it captured in crayon and colored pencil by someone who should have had no knowledge of her private grief. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Louis Romano. I know you have every right to hate me, but Mia insists that I need to tell you the truth about why I lied. All of it. Would you be willing to meet for coffee tomorrow? I promise no more deception. Deception. Audrey stared at the message for a long time. The professional part of her brain insisted that she should maintain boundaries, recuse herself from his account, and forget this evening had ever happened. She'd built Stone Marketing Solutions by maintaining clear lines between personal and professional relationships, never allowing emotions to compromise her business judgment. But the drawings changed everything. Mia's impossible knowledge suggested something deeper at work, something that transcended professional boundaries and entered territory that Audrey didn't understand but couldn't ignore. She found herself thinking about the girl's matter-of-fact certainty. The pictures show you staying. They show us all being happy. What kind of 6-year-old spoke with such conviction about outcomes that seemed impossible? More troubling was her own reaction to the evening. Despite the deception, despite the professional complications, despite every rational reason to walk away. She'd felt something when Louis had looked at her across that restaurant table. Not the attraction to wealth that he'd apparently expected, but recognition of something familiar, the careful way he'd cared for his daughter, the genuine grief that shadowed his eyes when he'd mentioned his wife, the vulnerability beneath the elaborate fiction he'd constructed. If he was just another wealthy man looking for entertainment, why had his deception felt so desperate rather than arrogant? Why had Mia's innocent questions clearly mortified him rather than amused him? Why had he looked like a man who'd lost something irreplaceable rather than someone who'd never had anything to lose? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Louis. I know I have no right to ask, but Mia hasn't stopped asking when you're coming back. Whatever happened tonight, it meant something to her. She's been drawing pictures of the three of us all evening. Audrey closed her eyes, seeing Mia's earnest face as she'd explained her drawings. The girl had treated the sketches not as fantasies, but as inevitable outcomes, as if she could see a future that the adults were too scared or stubborn to create. Maybe that was exactly what she could see. At 2:47 a.m., Audrey finally replied, "Coffee at 10 a.m., downtown grind on Morrison." And Louis? This conversation is happening because of your daughter, not in spite of her. She deserves the truth, even if I'm not sure you do. Downtown grind buzzed with typical Portland morning energy freelancers claiming tables with laptops. Business meetings conducted over lattes, students cramming for exams while surrounded by empty coffee cups. Louis arrived first, choosing a corner table that offered privacy while keeping sightlines to the entrance. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., cycling through conversation scenarios and practicing apologies that all sounded inadequate when spoken aloud. This time, he'd dressed as himself, tailored navy blazer over dark jeans, leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The confidence that came from knowing his appearance matched his actual circumstances. No more costumes, no more fictional personas. If this conversation was going to happen, it would happen between real people. Audrey entered exactly at 10, wearing a burgundy dress that complemented her auburn hair and carrying the leather portfolio that had become her signature. In business meetings, she moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. But Louis caught the slight hesitation as she scanned the coffee shop, spotted him, and briefly considered turning around. Instead, she walked directly to his table, set down her portfolio with the precision of someone laying evidence before a jury, and fixed him with the kind of direct gaze that had probably made dozens of CEOs reconsider their marketing budgets. "Before we begin," she said without preamble, "I need you to understand something. I'm here because your daughter drew things that should be impossible for her to know. Not because I'm charmed by wealthy men who think deception is an acceptable foundation for relationships." "I understand," Louis replied, standing to pull out her chair, a gesture that earned him a raised eyebrow but no rebuke. "And I need you to understand that I know how badly I screwed up. Not just the lying, but the assumption that you'd be like the others." "What others?" Louis signaled the barista for 2 coffees. He'd observed her order during their previous business meetings, then settled back into his chair. "The women who've been interested in Louis Romano, billionaire CEO, but couldn't stand Louis Romano. Single father who still cries at Disney movies." "You cry at Disney movies?" "Elena used to say I was more emotionally invested in animated characters than most people were in real relationships." The memory brought a brief smile to his face. Mia's inherited the same weakness. "We went through an entire box of tissues during Coco." Audrey's expression softened slightly, but she maintained her professional distance. "Tell me about the others, the women who supposedly only cared about your money." So Louis told her about Victoria, who'd changed personalities the moment she'd learned his net worth. About Sarah, who'd been more interested in his portfolio than his personality. About the dozen first dates that had ended the moment women realized he came with a grieving 6-year-old who needed stability, not adventure. I started feeling like a prize to be won rather than a person to be known, he explained. Everyone who approached me romantically was really approaching my bank account. So I thought, maybe if I removed money from the equation entirely, I could find someone who actually wanted me. And you thought lying was the solution? I thought honesty had been the problem. Louis ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that felt more authentic than anything he'd done the previous evening. I've been completely transparent about my circumstances, my responsibilities, my emotional baggage. All it had gotten me was a series of relationships with people who saw dollar signs instead of a person. Audrey was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with mechanical precision. I've been working on your account for 4 months, she said finally. Developing marketing strategies, writing copy, sitting in strategy meetings. With your team, did it never occur to you that we might meet? Honestly, no. I leave most of the marketing details to my team. I knew we'd hired Stone Marketing Solutions, but I'd never looked at staff assignments. Louis felt heat creep up his neck. If I had known ... You wouldn't have matched with me on a dating app while lying about everything? I wouldn't have been on a dating app at all. Professional boundaries exist for good reasons. They do. Audrey opened her portfolio and pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what looked like campaign materials. Which is why I spent most of last night reviewing every piece of work I've done for your company, looking for bias or compromise in my professional judgment. She turned the screen toward him, showing marketing copy that praised Romano Cybersecurity's commitment to transparency and authentic client relationships. I wrote this, she said, pointing to a headline that read, Trust Built on Truth, Romano Cybersecurity's commitment to honest communication. And this, another headline, When your security matters, authenticity isn't optional. Louis winced at each example. Audrey, I built your brand around values you apparently don't actually hold. I convinced clients to trust you based on principles you were willing to abandon the moment it became personally convenient. That's not fair, isn't it? Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone whose professional integrity had been compromised. You hired me to market your company as trustworthy while actively planning to deceive someone you hope to date. How? Is that not exactly what I just described? Louis felt the conversation slipping away from him, but Audrey wasn't finished. But here's what I can't understand, she continued, scrolling to another section of her tablet. Your company actually is everything I marketed it to be. The security solutions are revolutionary. The client testimonials are genuine. Your employees speak about you with respect and affection, not fear. Your business practices are ethical. Your charitable foundation has funded cybersecurity education in underserved communities. She looked up at him with genuine confusion. Romano Cybersecurity embodies all the values I used in the marketing campaigns. So why couldn't you bring those same values to a personal relationship? The question hit him like a physical blow because he didn't have a good answer. He'd spent years building a business reputation based on integrity while simultaneously constructing personal relationships based on deception. Fear, he said finally. In business, I'm confident. I know what I'm offering has value, but in dating, I felt like damaged goods. A widower with a traumatized daughter and emotional baggage that scared people away. So you decided to lie about the emotional baggage instead of finding someone who could handle the truth? When you put it like that, it sounds even worse then. It was pretty bad, Audrey agreed, but her tone had shifted slightly. Though I have to admit, your daughter's reaction suggests you're not quite the manipulative sociopath this conversation is making you sound like. Mia doesn't approve of the deception. She's been telling me it was wrong since I created the profile. Smart girl. Audrey closed her tablet and leaned back in her chair. Which brings us to the impossible part of the situation. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out her own folder, this one containing printouts of documents and photographs that made Louis's pulse quicken. After I left the restaurant last night, I couldn't stop thinking about Mia's drawings. So I did what I do when something doesn't make sense. I investigated. The first photograph showed Audrey in her office, standing at the exact window position. Mia had drawn, holding something small against her chest. The timestamp showed it had been taken 3 months ago by the building's security cameras. I got these from building security this morning, Audrey explained. I wanted to see if there was any logical explanation for how your daughter could have known about my private moments in my office. More photographs followed, each one corresponding to one of Mia's sketches with disturbing accuracy. Audrey crying at her desk late at night. Audrey standing at the window during lunch breaks. Audrey in the conference room, looking overwhelmed during a particularly difficult client meeting. There's no way she could have seen these moments, Audrey said quietly. My office is 32 floors up. The building has tinted windows. Even if she could somehow see in, these were private moments when I thought I was completely alone. Louis studied the photographs, comparing them to mental images of Mia's drawings. The correlation was undeniable and impossible. There's more, Audrey continued, pulling out medical records that made Louis's throat tighten. The pink blanket she drew me holding? It's real. It was intended for the daughter I lost 3 years ago. The pieces of Audrey's story came together in careful, clinical detail. The pregnancy, the miscarriage, the end of her marriage, the years of grief that had driven her to build Stone Marketing Solutions as a way of creating something meaningful from loss. I've been working from that office for 2 years, she said. And according to what you told me last night, you moved to Portland 6 months ago. Which means Mia started dreaming about me before you ever arrived in the city. That's impossible. So are her drawings. So is the level of detail she included about moments no one else witnessed. So is the fact that she knew things about my personal life that aren't public knowledge. Audrey leaned forward, fixing him with that direct gaze. Your daughter has been drawing me for 6 months, Louis. Drawing my grief, my office, my private moments of pain. And last night she said, those drawings show us all being happy together. The implication hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they should cross. What are you suggesting? Louis asked carefully. I'm suggesting that maybe your elaborate deception was the least impossible thing that happened last night. Audrey's voice carried the tone of someone reasoning through evidence that defied logic. I'm suggesting that your daughter might be able to see things the rest of us can't. And I'm suggesting that maybe we need to figure out why. She gathered the photographs and documents back into her portfolio with practiced efficiency. I'm going to recuse myself from your professional account, effective immediately. But I think I need to understand what's happening with Mia, for my own peace of mind, if nothing else. Are you saying you want to see us again? I'm saying I want to understand how a 6-year-old girl drew the most painful moments of my life with perfect accuracy. Audrey stood, slinging her portfolio over her shoulder. And maybe, if you can prove that you're capable of honesty, we can figure out why she seems so certain that we're supposed to be part of each other's lives. She paused at the table's edge, looking down at him with something that might have been hope mixed with extreme caution. But Louis, no more lies, no more fictional personas. No more pretending to be someone you're not. If we're going to figure this out, it has to be based on truth. All of it, he agreed, standing to face her. Starting with the fact that despite everything I did wrong last night, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Not the marketing executive I hired, but the woman who was kind to my daughter even when I was lying to your face. That's a start, Audrey said quietly. Now prove it. 3 days later, Louis found himself in the waiting room of Dr. Rachel Morrison's pediatric practice, Watching Mia color in a new sketchbook while trying to calm his own nerves. Dr. Morrison specialized in gifted young people and had been recommended by Mia's school counselor when her teachers had started asking questions about her unusual insights into classmates' family situations. She's drawn accurate pictures of her teacher's vacation before Mrs. Patterson had even planned it, the counselor had explained during their conference call. And last week, she created a detailed sketch of the principal's office renovation. 2 days before the contractors arrived, the staff is concerned. Dr. Morrison emerged from her office with the kind of warm professionalism that immediately put both father and daughter at ease. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Louis of Elena's gentle perceptiveness. "Mia, I love your artwork," she said, settling into the child-sized chair across from them. "Your father tells me you've been having very vivid dreams lately." "Not dreams exactly," Mia corrected with her characteristic precision. "More like seeing things that are happening somewhere else. Like watching TV, but the TV is in my head." Dr. Morrison nodded as if 6-year-olds regularly described psychic experiences during her appointments. "Can you tell me about the lady you've been drawing? The one with the auburn hair?" Mia brightened, flipping to a fresh page where she'd drawn Audrey sitting in her office, but this time the woman was smiling instead of crying. "Miss Audrey works in the tall building with all the windows. She's sad about losing something little, but she's going to be happy again soon." "How do you know she'd be happy?" "Because the pictures show different endings. The sad ones when she's by herself, and the happy ones when she's with me and Daddy." Mia looked up at Dr. Morrison with matter-of-fact certainty. "People get to choose which picture becomes real." After the appointment, Dr. Morrison spoke privately with Louis while Mia played in the reception area. "Your daughter exhibits characteristics consistent with what some researchers call heightened intuitive perception," she explained carefully. "It's rare, not well understood by mainstream medicine, but documented in psychological literature." "You're saying she's psychic?" "I'm saying she processes information differently than most people. Some young people seem to pick up on emotional and environmental cues that adults miss. They might sense someone's distress and translate that into visual representations, drawings, stories, play scenarios." Louis felt a mixture of relief and confusion. "So this is normal? It's unusual, but not harmful. The important thing is how you respond to it." Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her expression serious. "Children with this kind of sensitivity need adults who take their perceptions seriously, without making them feel like they're responsible for fixing everyone's problems." She handed him a business card for someone named Elena Vasquez, Ph.D. in parapsychology at Portland State University. Dr. Vasquez has studied cases like Mia's extensively. She might be able to provide more specific guidance. That afternoon, Louis found himself in Dr. Vasquez's office in the psychology building at Portland State. Unlike Dr. Morrison's warm pediatric space, this office felt more like a research laboratory, walls lined with academic journals, filing cabinets labeled with terms like precognitive experiences and spontaneous remote viewing. Dr. Vasquez was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back severely and the intense focus of someone who'd spent years defending research that mainstream academia often dismissed. "Mr. Romano, thank you for bringing Mia's case to my attention," she said, reviewing the photographs he'd shared of Mia's drawings alongside the security footage from Audrey's office building. "This level of specific accuracy in remote perception is quite remarkable." Remote perception? The ability to accurately describe people, places, or events outside normal sensory range. Dr. Vasquez pointed to details in Mia's sketches. "Your daughter has drawn architectural elements of Miss Stone's office that aren't visible from outside the building. She's captured emotional states during private moments. Most significantly, she's consistently drawn future scenarios that haven't yet occurred." She pulled out a thick folder filled with similar cases. I've been studying spontaneous psychic experiences in young people for 15 years. Children are often more open to this kind of perception because they haven't yet learned to filter out information that doesn't fit conventional reality. Are you saying this is real? That Mia can actually see things happening in other places? I'm saying the evidence suggests your daughter has access to information through non-conventional means. Whether we call it psychic ability, heightened intuition, or simply an unusually developed capacity for pattern recognition, the result is the same. She knows things she shouldn't be able to know. Dr. Vasquez showed him case studies of other families who dealt with similar situations. Children who'd drawn accurate pictures of grandparents they'd never met. Young people who'd warned family members about events before they happened. Kids who'd somehow sensed the emotional states of strangers across great distances. The common thread, she explained, is that these abilities often manifest when there's a strong emotional connection or need. Your daughter seems to have formed an attachment to Ms. Stone that transcends normal relationship boundaries. But why Audrey specifically? Why not other people? Other people. That's the question that makes this case particularly interesting. Dr. Vasquez leaned back in her chair, studying Louis with the same intensity she'd applied to Mia's drawings. Based on what you've told me, your daughter began having these visions the first night you moved to Portland, correct? Yes, 6 months ago. And Miss Stone has been working in that office building for 2 years, dealing with private grief that she's kept hidden from professional colleagues. Louis nodded, not sure where this was leading. Sometimes, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, sensitive individuals pick up on emotional resonance between people who haven't yet met. Your daughter may have sensed a connection between you and Miss Stone before either of you was consciously aware of it. The implication hit Louis like a physical blow. You're suggesting that Mia somehow knew we were supposed to meet? I'm suggesting that your daughter may have perceived compatibility or emotional alignment that wouldn't become apparent through normal social channels. Her drawings consistently show positive outcomes when the three of you are together. That suggests she's not just observing current reality, but potential future realities. Dr. Vasquez pulled out one final document, a research paper she'd published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. Children with these abilities often serve as emotional catalysts for adults who need healing but don't know how to find it. Your daughter may have unconsciously guided you both toward a meeting that was necessary for both your emotional growth. That sounds like science fiction. So did electricity before we understood electromagnetic fields. So did radio waves before we developed the technology to detect them. Dr. Vasquez smiled. Just because we don't fully understand how something works doesn't mean it isn't real. She walked them to the elevator, but before they parted, she offered one final piece of advice. Mr. Romano, your daughter's abilities are a gift, but they're also a responsibility. She's shown you something that most people never get to see, a glimpse of what's possible when people choose honesty over fear. Don't waste that opportunity. Audrey's decision to recuse herself from the Romano cybersecurity account created immediate complications at Stone Marketing Solutions. The Portland launch campaign was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks, with advertising placements already purchased and media interviews confirmed. Pulling the lead strategist at this stage would require her to either reveal personal conflicts to her entire team or construct a professional fiction that felt uncomfortably similar to Louis' dating deception. She sat in her conference room at 7 a.m., 3 days after the coffee shop meeting, surrounded by her senior staff who were trying to understand why their most successful account manager was suddenly stepping away from their biggest contract. The messaging strategy is perfect, insisted Jake Morrison, her lead copywriter. The client loves everything we've developed. Why would we reassign the account now? Professional conflict of interest, Audrey replied, keeping her explanation deliberately vague. Sometimes personal circumstances change in ways that compromise professional objectivity. What kind of personal circumstances? Asked Maria Santos, her media relations director. Are you and Romano involved romantically? Because that would actually be great for our agency's reputation. No, Audrey said quickly, then caught herself. It's complicated. Complicated how? Maria pressed. Because if there's a scandal brewing, we need to know before it affects our other clients. Audrey found herself in the impossible position of explaining a situation that defied explanation. How could she tell her team that she needed to step away from a professional relationship because the client's 6-year-old daughter had somehow drawn detailed pictures of her private moments of grief? How could she explain that she was questioning everything she thought she knew about reality because of crayon sketches that depicted impossible knowledge? There's no scandal, she said finally. But I have personal history with Mr. Romano that I wasn't aware of when we took the account. Maintaining professional boundaries requires that someone else handle the relationship going forward. Jake and Maria exchanged glances that clearly communicated their skepticism, but neither pushed further. Audrey had built Stone Marketing Solutions on the foundation of professional integrity, and her team trusted her judgment even when they didn't understand her reasoning. I'll take over the account, Jake offered. I've been involved in the strategy development from the beginning. Thank you. The transition should be seamless, all the groundwork is solid. Audrey gathered her materials but paused before leaving the conference room. One more thing. If Mr. Romano requests a meeting to discuss the transition, please let me know before confirming anything. That afternoon, as if summoned by her mention of his name, Louis Romano appeared in Stone Marketing Solutions lobby. Audrey watched through her office window as he spoke with the receptionist, noting that he'd dressed as himself this time-expensive suit. Confident posture, the bearing of someone accustomed to having his requests taken seriously. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Miss Stone, Louis Romano is here to see you. He says it's about the account transition. Audrey took a deep breath. Send him up. Louis entered her office carrying 2 coffee cups from downtown Grind and a manila folder that looked ominously thick. He set 1 coffee on her desk prepared. Exactly how she liked it. She noticed and settled into the chair across from her with the care of someone approaching a volatile situation. Before you say anything, he began, I want you to know that I'm not here to discuss our personal situation. I'm here because your withdrawal from my account is going to create problems that affect both our businesses. Audrey raised an eyebrow. I'm sure Jake Morrison can handle the transition smoothly. He's been involved in the strategy development. It's not about competence, Louis interrupted, opening his folder to reveal contracts and timelines. It's about timing and trust. The Portland launch depends on media relationships you've spent months building. Client testimonials you've personally cultivated. Strategic partnerships that exist because of your specific reputation in the industry. He was right, and Audrey knew it. Stone Marketing Solutions had built the Romano cybersecurity campaign around her personal brand as a marketing strategist who delivered results through authentic relationship building. Transferring that trust to another team member at this stage would require starting over with key stakeholders. The campaign will succeed regardless of who manages it, she said, though she could hear the lack of conviction in her own voice. Maybe. But it won't succeed as well, and we both know it. Louis leaned forward, his expression serious. I need this Portland launch to work, Audrey. Not for the money, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But for the 2,000 employees whose jobs depend on expansion success. For the clients who are trusting us to protect their most valuable data. For the community partnerships we're trying to build. Audrey felt the familiar tug of professional responsibility warring with personal boundaries. She'd built her career on delivering exceptional results for clients, even when circumstances became complicated. What are you proposing? She asked carefully. Finish the Portland launch. 6 weeks of professional collaboration to execute the strategy you've already developed. After that, If you still want to transfer the account, I'll support whatever transition you think is appropriate. And our personal situation, completely separate. During business hours, I'm your client and you're my marketing strategist. Outside of business hours. Louis paused, choosing his words carefully. Outside of business hours, I'm hoping we can figure out why my daughter seems so certain that we're supposed to be part of each other's lives. Audrey walked to her office window, looking out at the Portland skyline that Mia had drawn with impossible accuracy. The proposal made professional sense, but it also terrified her. Working closely with Louis while navigating the mysterious connection his daughter had revealed felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she could uncross. There would have to be strict boundaries, she said without turning around. Absolutely. No. Personal discussions during business meetings. No reference to our dating situation in front of my team or your employees. No blurring of professional and personal lines. Agreed. And if at any point the personal complications interfere with professional performance, the account transfers immediately, regardless of timing. Fair enough. Audrey turned back to face him, noting the relief in his expression as he realized she was considering his proposal. 6 weeks, she said finally. But Louis? If you lie to me about anything business or personal during those 6 weeks, it's over. The professional relationship, the personal exploration, all of it. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not just talking about big lies like pretending to be broke. I'm talking about small deceptions, convenient omissions, strategic misdirections. After what happened at Bella Vista, I need to know that you're capable of complete honesty. Louis stood, extending his hand in a gesture that was purely professional despite the personal undercurrents. 6 weeks of absolute truth, no exceptions. Audrey shook his hand, noting the warmth of his palm and the slight tremor that suggested this handshake meant more to him than a simple business agreement. Then let's see if you can prove that the man I've been marketing for 4 months actually exists. The Romano cybersecurity offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Portland tower, but it was the personal touches that caught Audrey's attention during her first official visit since learning Louis' true identity. Photos of Mia at various ages lined his office walls, not the sterile corporate headshots she'd expected, but candid moments of father-daughter life. Mia finger painting with concentrated determination. Mia asleep in Louis' arms during what looked like a long flight. Mia and a beautiful dark-haired woman, Elena, building a snowman in what appeared to be their backyard. You keep her memory alive, Audrey observed, studying the photograph of Elena teaching Mia to ride a bicycle. Mia needs to know her mother was real, Louis replied, settling behind his desk with coffee that had become their morning ritual. That Elena's love was the foundation everything else is built on. They'd fallen into a routine over the past 2 weeks that surprised Audrey with its natural ease. Business meetings that began with campaign strategy and ended with personal conversations that revealed layers of Louis' character she hadn't expected. He was nothing like the arrogant billionaire archetype she'd anticipated. Instead, he was thoughtful, self-deprecating, and genuinely interested in her professional insights. The media interviews are confirmed for next week, she reported, spreading publicity schedules across his conference table. Portland Business Journal, Tech Weekly, and the morning show segment on Channel 8. Are you comfortable with the talking points we developed? About Romano Cybersecurity's commitment to protecting family businesses? Absolutely. Louis paused, then added with the careful honesty that had characterized their professional relationship since his promise of complete truth. Though I have to admit, I'm nervous about the personal questions. Reporters always want to know about work-life balance when you're a single parent. What makes you nervous about those questions? Explaining how I balance building a global company with raising a 6-year-old without sounding like I'm either neglecting my business or neglecting my daughter. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Audrey had learned meant he was processing something difficult. The truth is, I'm probably failing at both more often than I succeed. It was exactly the kind of honest vulnerability that the fake mechanic Louis would never have revealed, and Audrey felt something shift in her chest. This was the man she'd been marketing for months, someone who understood that real strength came from acknowledging weakness, that authentic leadership meant admitting when you didn't have all the answers. "You're not failing," she said quietly. "Mia is confident, curious, and kind. Those don't happen by accident. Elena deserves most of the credit for that. I'm just trying not to undo her good work." Their afternoon meeting was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Mia appeared in the doorway, still wearing her school backpack and carrying her ever-present sketchbook. Louis' assistant, Sarah, followed close behind with an apologetic expression. "Sorry, Mr. Romano. The after-school program had an early dismissal, and Mia insisted she needed to see you immediately." "It's okay," Louis assured her, then turned to his daughter. "What's the emergency, sweetheart?" Mia approached the conference table where Audrey was working, pulling out her sketchbook with the determination of someone on an important mission. "I need to show Miss Audrey the new pictures," she announced, flipping to a section that made both. Adults leaned forward with concern. The drawings showed Audrey, but not in her office or in their restaurant. Instead, they depicted her in what looked like a hospital room, holding something small and precious. In one sketch she was crying, in another, she was smiling. The final drawing showed her walking out of the hospital carrying a baby carrier, with Louis and Mia waiting by a car. "What are these, Mia?" Audrey asked carefully, her voice tight with something that might have been hope or fear. "Your happy ending," Mia replied matter-of-factly. "The baby you lost gets to come back, but different. Like when you plant seeds. In the garden sometimes they grow in places you don't expect." Audrey's face went white. She gripped the edge of the conference table, her knuckles standing out stark against her skin. "Mia," Louis said gently, "remember what we talked about? Sometimes the pictures you draw are just pictures, not things that will definitely happen." "These will happen," Mia said with 6-year-old certainty. "But only if Miss Audrey stops being scared of being happy again." The silence that followed was broken by Audrey's phone buzzing against the conference table. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at them with an expression of pure shock. "That's my doctor's office," she said slowly. "I wasn't expecting a call." She answered with trembling hands, stepping away from the table for privacy. Louis watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like carefully controlled hope. "Yes," she said into the phone. "Yes, I can come in this afternoon. Thank you." When she ended the call, she stared at Mia for a long moment before speaking. "I had a routine appointment last week," she said quietly. "Just an annual checkup. But they found something unexpected in the blood work and wanted to run additional tests." She paused, looking between Louis and Mia. "That was the nurse calling. With results, I'm pregnant." The news hit the room like a shockwave. Louis felt his breath catch, while Mia simply nodded as if she'd been expecting this revelation all along. "How is that possible?" Audrey continued, more to herself than to them. "David and I tried for 2 years. The specialist said there was no medical reason I couldn't conceive, but it just never happened again after the miscarriage. Sometimes," Mia said wisely, "people have to be ready in their hearts before their bodies can grow new life." Audrey sank into her chair, medical reality warring with impossible implications. "This doesn't make sense. I haven't been trying to get pregnant. I haven't even been dating anyone seriously." She looked at Louis with something approaching panic. "We've had coffee twice. This ISN single quotes T. We're not." 8 weeks, Mia announced, pointing to one of her drawings that showed Audrey in a doctor's office while a technician pointed at a screen. "That's how long the baby has been growing." Louis did the math quickly. 8 weeks ago would have been shortly after he'd moved to Portland, around the time Mia had started having her dreams about Audrey. before he'd even created his fake dating profile, before they'd met at Bella Vista. The father, Audrey said slowly, realization dawning. There was someone, about 2 months ago. A conference in Seattle, I thought it was just. She stopped, looking embarrassed. It was just one night. I never expected. The pictures show he's not important, Mia said simply. Not mean, just not part of our story. But the baby is. She's been waiting for the right family to be ready for her. She? Audrey asked. Lily, Mia replied confidently. That's her name. Lily Rose, because she's going to grow in a garden of love instead of sadness. Louis watched Audrey process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about biology, destiny, and the mysterious ways that families formed. Her professional composure had completely cracked, revealing someone who was struggling to balance rational thought with impossible hope. I need to think, she said finally, gathering her materials with mechanical precision. This is a lot to process. Of course, Louis agreed, though he noticed Mia's disappointed expression. Take all the time you need. But as Audrey reached the office door, she paused and turned back to them. Mia, in your drawings, in the happy ending pictures, am I alone with the baby? No, Mia replied with absolute certainty. Nobody has to be alone anymore. That's the whole point of families. They mean no one has to carry love by themselves. After Audrey left, Louis pulled Mia onto his lap, studying her latest drawings with wonder and concern. Baby girl, how do you know these things? I just see them, Mia replied, snuggling against his chest. Like how you know when I'm sad even. When I don't say anything. Some people can feel feelings, and some people can see pictures of what's coming. I got the picture gift. And you really think Miss Audrey is supposed to be part of our family? I don't think it, Daddy, I know it. The same way I knew Mama was sick before the doctors found out. And the same way I know you're going to stop being scared of loving someone new. Louis held his daughter close, marveling at the wisdom contained in such a small person. Whether Mia's abilities were supernatural or simply an unusually developed intuition, she'd guided him towards something he'd never expected to find again. The possibility of a family built on truth rather than deception, love rather than convenience, and hope rather than fear. Outside his office windows, Portland stretched toward the horizon where the Columbia River reflected afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in that city, Audrey was processing news that would change everything for her, for him, and for the little girl who seemed to see futures that adults were too scared to imagine. All he could do now was wait, and trust that the truth he'd finally committed to telling would be enough to build something real. 2 weeks after the pregnancy revelation, Louis found himself in the most unlikely place he'd ever conducted business, the maternity section of Powell's Books, Portland's legendary independent bookstore. Audrey sat across from him in one of the store's reading nooks, surrounded by pregnancy guides and parenting books, conducting what had become their strangest client meeting yet. The media response to your interviews has been exceptional, Audrey reported, flipping through press clippings with one hand while absently rubbing her still flat stomach with the other. Portland Business Journal called you refreshingly authentic. For a tech CEO, the Tech Weekly piece generated 12 new enterprise client inquiries. And the morning show segment? Viral on social media. Particularly the moment when you talked about Elena teaching you that business success means nothing if you lose yourself in the process. Audrey looked up from her notes. That wasn't in our prepared talking points. I know, but when the interviewer asked about work-life balance, I realized I was tired of giving corporate-approved answers about everything. Louis gestured around. The bookstore where they'd started meeting after Audrey had mentioned it was the one place that made her feel calm during her emotional turmoil. This whole experience has taught me that authenticity isn't just a marketing buzzword. It's the only way to build anything that lasts. Audrey closed her portfolio, their business discussion naturally transitioning to the personal territory. They'd been navigating with increasing comfort. Speaking of authenticity, I need to tell you something about the baby's father. Louis felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Okay. His name is David Chun. He's a venture capitalist I met at the Seattle conference. Audrey's voice carried the clinical tone she used when discussing difficult subjects. One drink led to conversation about failed marriages, which led to a hotel room, which led to me driving home the next morning, convinced I'd made a mistake. She pulled out her phone, showing him a text conversation from the previous week. I told him about the pregnancy. He offered to pay for an abortion and asked me not to contact him again. Her laugh was bitter. Apparently, unexpected families don't fit into his 5-year plan. Louis studied her face, noting the hurt beneath her matter-of-fact delivery. I'm sorry. That must have been difficult. It was clarifying, Audrey corrected. It reminded me why I stopped trying to date seriously. After my divorce, most people want the convenient parts of relationships without the complicated reality of building something together. Is that what we're doing? Building something together? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and risk. They'd been dancing around their growing connection for weeks, finding excuses to extend business meetings and reasons to share personal stories that had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. I don't know what we're doing, Audrey admitted. 6 weeks ago, I thought I was hiring a marketing consultant. 3 weeks ago, I discovered my client had been lying about his entire identity. 2 weeks ago, I found out I'm pregnant with another man's baby. None of this makes logical sense. But Mia keeps drawing pictures of us together, and somehow those pictures feel more real than any plan I've ever made. Audrey placed her hand over her stomach, a gesture that was becoming automatic. And every time I'm with you and Mia, I remember what it feels like to hope for something instead of just surviving until the next day. Louis reached across the small table, covering her hand with his. The gesture was simple, but it felt like crossing a bridge that couldn't be uncrossed. Audrey, I need you to know something. This baby, whether she's biologically mine or not, if we're going to try this, she's going to be loved like she belongs to both of us. I'm not offering to be a stepfather or a helpful friend. I'm offering to be a dad, completely and permanently. Tears welled in Audrey's eyes, the first time he'd seen her cry since that night at Bella Vista. How can you say that? You don't even know if this relationship will work. You don't know if I'm capable of being the partner you need. Because Mia has been drawing our family for 6 months, and every picture shows us choosing each other. Because you've spent weeks proving that you can love my daughter without needing to own her. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before grief convinced me that protecting my heart was more important than opening it. Audrey leaned into his touch, and Louis felt something shift between them, not the desperate attraction of people trying to fill their loneliness, but the solid recognition of people who'd found their complement. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely insane, he agreed. But Alina used to say that the best things in life happen when you stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting the process. What if Mia's drawings are wrong? What if we try this and everything falls apart? Then we'll have tried something beautiful and brave instead of settling for safe and empty. Louis lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Besides, have you seen what happens to people who bet against Mia's visions? Audrey laughed despite her tears, and Louis felt hope bloom in his chest like spring after a long winter. Around them, Powell's books hummed with quiet energy, people discovering new worlds through pages, falling in love with stories they'd never expected to find, just like them. 1 year later, the Romano Cybersecurity Portland headquarters buzzed with celebration as employees, clients, and media gathered for the official grand opening of their West Coast operations. The event, orchestrated by Stone Marketing Solutions, had been featured in Forbes as a masterclass in authentic brand building. But Louis barely noticed the professional accolades as he stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching his wife adjust their 3-month-old daughter's tiny dressed-out Audrey looked radiant in the deep blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, now styled in the elegant updo she favored for public events. But it was the natural ease with which she balanced baby Lily on her hip, while directing last-minute event details that took Louis's breath away. This was the woman Mia had been drawing for months before they'd ever met, confident, beautiful, and completely at home in their life together. "The Channel 8 crew wants to interview you in 5 minutes, Audrey informed him, approaching with Lily gurgling contentedly in her arms. "And the mayor's office just confirmed they'll be using your cybersecurity education initiative as a model for other cities." "Our initiative," Louis corrected, taking Lily while Audrey adjusted his tie with the practiced intimacy of people who'd learned to be partners in everything. "None of this would have happened without your strategic vision." It was true. The Portland launch had exceeded every projection, but more importantly, it had become a blueprint for how authentic leadership could drive both business success and community impact. The cybersecurity education programs they'd developed were protecting small businesses throughout the Pacific Northwest. The employee wellness initiatives Audrey had suggested were being studied by companies nationwide. "Daddy, Miss Reporter wants to talk to me too." Mia appeared at his elbow, wearing the purple dress she'd insisted on because it matches Lily's eyes when the light hits them just right. At 7, she'd grown taller but maintained the otherworldly perceptiveness that had brought their family together. "What did you tell her?" Audrey asked, crouching down to Mia's level while still maintaining her professional poise. "I told her about my art show next week, and about how sometimes families start with pictures before they start with people." Mia grinned proudly. She said that was very wise for someone my age. The art show was Mia's latest project, an exhibition of her drawings documenting their family's formation, from the early sketches of Audrey crying alone in her office to recent portraits of all 4 of them together. Dr. Vasquez had suggested that displaying Mia's work might help other families understand that intuitive connections weren't something to fear, but something to celebrate. "Speaking of your art," Louis said, "did you finish the special drawing for today?" Mia nodded enthusiastically, pulling a folded paper from her small purse. The drawing showed the Romano cybersecurity building with tiny figures visible through the windows, employees working at computers, clients meeting in conference rooms, families protected by security systems they'd never see. At the bottom, in Mia's careful printing, were the words, "When you tell the truth, everyone gets to be safe." "That's going into the corporate collection," Audrey declared, kissing the top of Mia's head, right next to Daddy's first coding notebook and the original Romano cybersecurity business plan. The interview went smoothly, with Louis finding that authentic responses came more naturally than the corporate speak he'd once relied on. When the reporter asked about balancing family and business responsibilities, he gestured toward Audrey and the girls without hesitation. "My wife taught me that you don't balance family and work," he said. "You integrate them. When your personal values align with your professional mission, everything else becomes clearer." "And what mission is that?" "Protecting what matters most," Louis replied, the company slogan taking on deeper meaning as he watched Mia show Lily the lights of downtown Portland through the window. "We started with digital security, but we've learned that real protection comes from building authentic relationships based on trust. After the formal interviews concluded, they found themselves alone in Louis's office as the celebration continued in the main atrium below. Lily had fallen asleep in her carrier, and Mia was in the break room charming the catering staff with stories about her upcoming art exhibition. "Do you ever think about how different this could have been?" Audrey asked, settling onto the couch where Louis joined her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby between them. "You mean if I'd kept lying? Or if I'd refused to give you a second chance after Bella Vista? Or if we'd convinced ourselves that Mia's drawings were just childhood imagination?" Louis considered the alternative timeline where fear had won over faith, where he'd remained isolated in his wealth, and she'd stayed trapped in her grief. I think about it sometimes. But then I remember what Mia said that first night: people get to choose which picture becomes real. And we chose the happy ending. We chose the truth, Louis corrected. The happiness was just a bonus. Audrey leaned against his shoulder, and Louis marveled at how perfectly she fit there, as if this moment had been inevitable from the day he'd moved to Portland. And Mia had started dreaming of auburn-haired women in tall buildings. There's something I need to tell you, Audrey said quietly. About the Bella Vista reservation. What about it? I made it. 6 months ago, I booked a table for 2 at Bella Vista for that exact night, because ... She paused, looking embarrassed. Because I'd been having dreams about a little girl with dark hair, who kept telling me that her daddy needed someone to love them both. I thought I was losing my mind, so I decided to try one blind date to prove to myself that I was ready to move forward. Louis felt his world tilt slightly. You're saying you both chose that restaurant because of dreams about each other? I'm saying Mia wasn't the only one receiving mysterious information about people she'd never met. Audrey smiled up at him. I'm saying maybe some connections are so meant to be that the universe conspires to make them happen, even when the people involved are too scared to try. Lily stirred in her sleep, and Louis gently lifted her to his shoulder, breathing in the sweet baby scent that had become home. She wasn't biologically his, but she was completely theirs, another gift that had arrived through pathways that defied conventional explanation. So what now? He asked. We've built the business, formed the family, proved that truth works better than deception. What's next for the Romano family? More truth, Audrey replied simply. More trust. More of whatever magic happens when people choose love over fear. Through the office windows, Portland sparkled with evening lights, each one representing a business protected by their security systems, a family made safer by their work. But inside the office, surrounded by the quiet breathing of sleeping baby and the distant sounds of celebration, Louis understood that the most valuable thing he'd ever protected was the family that had formed around honesty, grown through trust, and flourished because a little girl had been brave enough to see possibilities that adults were too scared to imagine. The fake mechanic Louis had died at that first dinner, replaced by someone better, a man who'd learned that real strength came from vulnerability, that authentic success required genuine relationships, and that sometimes the most important business you can build is a family founded on truth. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of people working, dreaming, building lives one honest moment at a time. And inside, the Romano family did the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.